Hey guys, I'm here today to show you how to stretch dough. I'm here with Chef Willie.
Hey, what's up?
And we're going to show you two different methods. We have a little different style that we do. My method is great if you have a lot of time and you want to stretch the dough very slowly, just sort of that little bit of extra perfection. Willie's method is when you are in a hurry, you've got a line of customers, and you've got to get it out the door. So sometimes in life there are these trade-offs. This is one of them, and it's acceptable to use either method. So I've got my dough and it's covered here. And I've got 8 dough balls here. These are 200 grams apiece, and they're covered top and bottom with parchment. And I'm just going to go ahead and remove the parchment from just one of them. Now, if I knew that I was going to sell all 8 of these pizzas very, very quickly, it wouldn't matter if I just peeled off the whole sheet. But if I only have a couple of customers and I'm not really sure when these are going to sell, I'll keep the paper on it to keep as much moisture as I can. Otherwise, they're going to form a little bit of a skin at the top, especially when you get to the back to the last one. It's going to form a little bit of a skin, and that's not so great for stretching. So I'm going to peel off the dough, and I'm going to flip it upside down. So the top that was on the top is turned over, and that's going to become the bottom of the pizza. And again, because I don't know how many customers I have and how quickly I'm going to sell these, I'm going to keep it covered. Now what I'm going to do is I put flour on the board, and I'm going to flour my hands. But with my method, I'm not going to put much flour on the top. Willie's going to put flour on the top in his method, but in mine, I'm not going to. I'm just going to make a little cornice here. That means I'm making the little crust edge. And whatever I do right here, by the time we stretch out the pie, that's going to be exaggerated and going to form the crust. The reason I'm not putting flour at the top is that the flour can tend to be dusty on the customer's hands. Any flour that ends up on the top can end up staying as flour and not really turning into crust. So I'd rather flour just one side, really just the minimum amount of flour that I need to get this on and off the peel. Now, the other thing to note is that this dough, actually, I could stretch this out very, very quickly. This dough came out perfect today. It's so smooth and soft. I could just pull this right away, but I'm just going to stretch it halfway. Dough likes to be done in little stages. It'll stay more structured, it'll have more bubbles and air on the inside if we treat it gently and just do it a little at a time. So I'm going to let that sit. And at this point I can either start another pizza if I needed it, or I can go over here and flour my board. I'm just going to flour my board. And how much flour do we put on the board? Well, I'm going to put the minimum amount, which means that I'm going to flour it good, but then I'm going to give it a little bang, and you're going to see a lot of that falls right off. So I just have a minimal amount of flour. Now, I know that I can get away with putting a small amount of flour in here because I know this pie, once it's put on here, is not going to stick to it. We're going to get that sauce and cheese on it really, really quickly and get it right into the oven. If you're not so sure about that, if you think the guy who's topping the pizzas, putting the sauce and cheese on, is a little slower, or if there's a line of pizzas ahead of it, and you're pre-making it, it might sit here on its peel for a while, then you really want to make sure you have a little bit more flour just to make sure that it's going to release. It really depends on how long the dough is going to sit on the board. The longer it sits on the board, the more the moisture is going to come out of the dough, gum up that flour, and cause it to stick. And you really don't want that, because if the dough were to stick to the peel and you go to slide it off, so you like stick it in the oven and you yank the peel back, but the dough sticks to it, the whole dough is going to misshape, the sauce and cheese are going to fall off onto the oven, and it's going to be a bloody mess. Now, we have a couple of methods that we can use to make sure it doesn't happen, to make sure that the dough will release, and we're going to show you those right now. But as a general rule, you want to gauge the amount of flour, minimum you can, to make sure it gets in the oven. So now I'm going to pick up my dough here, going back to my dough, and I'm just going to hold it. I'm just going to hold it and gradually let it sort of pull on its own. It's just pulling. Wow, this dough is perfect today. I'm going to turn it over in my hands here, and I'm just going to stretch it gently. Couldn't have made a better dough today. Look at me taking credit for my dough maker. Okay, that's about right. I'm going to go ahead and place it on the peel. Now, what size are we doing? That's something that you're really going to have to get practice. Now, we make a couple of sizes of pizzas. We make the 13.5 inch, we make an 11 inch, depends on your particular unit and what they're selling. So consult your manager and your recipe sheets for that step. But this is just about right now, okay? Now, that's my dough. Willie's going to go ahead and show you how he does his dough. It's a little faster. a little more stress on the dough, though.
Okay, so we start with just a little bit more flour than Jeff was adding there. We also grab the dough. Remember to grab the dough from one edge and not manhandle it.
Yeah, you're being very gentle with this dough at all times. You're never really treating the dough rough.
Okay, once we put it on the table, I flour one side and I go ahead and get the other. I want to make sure there's enough flour on the table because what I'm going to be doing is stretching right on the surface. Like Jeff, I also make an indentation for my crust. The closer you get to the edge, the smaller your crust. The further in you get to the middle, the bigger your crust. So
You're talking about the final crust when it comes out,
right,
like cornice. At the
right.
end of the
So
pot, right?
I'm going in between. That's about where we want it. Then I turn it over again just to get good definition.
Now, Willie has turned this over a couple of times, but you're still making sure in your head that the side that was in the top on the sheet pan is on the bottom when the pot
and which is the side that's upright presently. Okay, so now once I've got both sides done, what I do is I put my hand over the middle. I'm being very mindful not to compromise and manipulate the middle structure of the dough. If you can see, it's almost like a small hill, a mound.
Now, some people go and they press on the inside.
Right.
We don't like to.
We don't
We
like
want to
to do
keep all the bubbles, all the air on the inside of the crust as possible.
Correct. So
one of the reasons that we store it this way in these containers is because we found this method keeps more of the air inside the crust than any other storage method that we have. So we don't want to ruin that now.
Now I place my hand, my palm of my hand, over the middle to protect it. Then I'm going counterclockwise and I'm pulling on one end with my left hand and protecting with the right. And I turn again. This dough is really good today. Again, I just need to go around once. Sometimes the dough's a little tighter. You might have to go around a couple times. Then again, I flour the peel over here. The more pressure you put on your peel, the better you get some of that fine flour into the grain of the wood.
Right. I forgot to mention that point.
Okay, and then another little tap just like Jeff did. And I pick the dough up, and I just go back and forth with it. I have the slapping motion with momentum. It'll start to stretch. I come and I grab it from the bottom and I peel back up, bottom up. And if you can, you go ahead and throw it in the air. And all you need is about 2 times to do that, and we're done. Go right on the peel with the bottom side, which is the top side now, up. And if you look at Jeff's dough here, we have all these bubbles in the structure, and I was able to maintain the same thing on my dough with the protection of the palm of my hand. And if you see, you'll get some of these bigger bubbles in there. It's okay if you come in there and you just give a quick little pinch.
Let me explain what's going to happen while you're doing that. Because if this bubbles up, if you have a single solid bubble, what I like to do is keep a nice foam of small bubbles. But if you get a big solid bubble, it's going to rise faster than the rest of the dough, and it's just going to burn. And you don't want a big burn spot in the middle of your pot, or really on the edge. This bubble, too, is sort of questionable. You can sort of pop that open, too. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a big burn spot. We're looking for char, but not big swaths of black burn. Well, do me a favor. Go ahead and do one real time. Let's do one real fast.
Sure.
Just so they can see how quickly it can be done.
Sure. Let's get that off.
Put that off to the side.
You have a timer, Jeff?
No. It's not a contest. I want you to show how we do it in real life.
See, there's a little hole in here. We're also dough repairmen. You just flap over that on the seam, give a couple little taps, turn it over, make sure you're good, and there you go.
And those taps are important. Explain why, Willie?
Well, you want to make sure that it's kind of regenerating on top of itself. Those little taps right there is really putting pressure on the dough, and you're creating just another surface for that sauce not to soak through.
So you can see this method, we'll get a few more tears, so there's a little more violence on the dough, but you can see how very fast that was, and
right.
We need that, and it's still a great dough. So that's it, that's stretching the dough. Now, before we go and top the dough, I'm just going to give it a little shake. Now, this has been sitting here for a while, and you can see when I first shook it, it was sort of stuck. But as I shake it, it will release itself from the peel. So do that every once in a while. Should also mention, though, that as soon as you do shake a dough like that, it is going to begin to shrink. You can see it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller as I stretch it. So at this point, since I can still pick it up, I'll go ahead and pick it up and give it another sort of full stretch. And now it's back out to full size again. If the dough was already topped, so we're going to go ahead and put sauce and cheese on it now, and we still have to shake it one more time before it goes in the oven. You can see how it shrinks when you do that. At that point, you simply stretch it out again by putting your hands under the side and lifting and pulling, right?
Correct.
Now, we're going to go ahead and show you this a couple of times. I'm going to show you this trick a few times. We're going to go ahead and top a pie now. If the dough is sticking, or if we think there's any danger of it whatsoever, you can pick up the lip and you can blow on it. And that will cause it to release from the peel. However, if you have a big bubble, it's possible to transfer that whole bubble into the oven. Even though you're pushing it off that peel, it actually is possible to get that entire bubble onto the stone. And that's terrible. Because if you do that, that means this part's cooking real fast, this part's not cooking at all. In fact, it's sticking up. All the sauce is pouring off of it. It's rolling off of it, and this side's just going to burn. That's really bad. Let's do that again. And I'm going to show you how to get it on the stone without transferring that bubble. Okay, so you can see I've created a big bubble. Obviously your bubble, this is exaggerated, your bubble might not be this big. So the first thing you'll want to do is, if you can, get your hand under it and get rid of some of the bubbles. But if there's still a bubble there, and you can't really get it off because the cheese and everything is in your way, then what you do is you get it off the stone. As you get it off the stone, you want to tip the stone, and you want to lift it a little higher. And that way, you're creating enough air underneath it for you to peel it right off. Okay, it's going to take a little bit of practice on the stone, and we'll show that to you again in the oven, but I thought you might enjoy seeing it right here on the counter where it's a little easier to see. Okay, Willie and I wanted to go over just one other topic with you, and that is thin spots in the dough. So sometimes you'll notice that there's a spot that's just thinner than the other spots. Now, if it's one or two doughs, of course, that's not a problem. The dough is pretty pliable and should stretch out. If you're noticing that the thin spots are bigger, or that it's a chronic problem with more than one or two, what you're going to find is that those thin spots are going to translate into holes in the oven. If it is a chronic problem, talk to whoever is rolling out your dough. Willie, talk about that just a little bit. What can go wrong when you're rolling out the dough that can give you thin spots later and create all kinds of problems? Because if I get it so thin that I put it in the oven and it turns into a hole in the oven, it can throw off the entire sequence. That pie might need to be redone, and now all of a sudden you're redoing work you just did, or you're creating burns and smoke in the oven. It can throw off the timing. The person who stretches the dough the day before can have a dramatic effect on service the next day.
Absolutely. So, first of all, we need to understand that every single dough ball is different. There's not one that's the same. And with that said, there's different ways that these dough balls are balled, which makes them different. So when we're balling dough, it's typically a folding action that gets started. If we fold too much, the ball might get too tight. If we fold not enough, it's going to be really loose. So those two variations are going to make a difference on your final product. In a situation like this, where you have a thin spot, I would say that that ball might have been too loose. But now, where a ball might be too tight, you'll notice that it's weighted on one side versus then the other side, and then you'll have something that we like to call webbing, which is multiple layers of dough. It'll look almost sort of like a membrane of sausage casing or something like that. That's
right, it'll sort of cross over.
And they'll cross over. So that's an example of over balled dough, which is too tight, and this would be a great example of dough that was balled kind of loose. So those are the two things that come to mind right away that you want to look for.
Now this dough wasn't a problem. This dough is actually one of the best doughs. It's an amazing dough today. But this is what the webbing might look like. Just a little bit, you can see. It's so thin. If I put something here, you might actually be able to read through it. This dough can stretch so thin that you can actually read through it, and that's called a window painting. It's so thin that it's like a window pane. These doughs are so great. Let's just show as an example, Willie. Let's just stretch doughs out as far as they're going to go. Just to show that as an example of how pliable our dough is. And you can see this dough has been sitting here a while. I do have a couple of tiny holes in it. That's because it's been sitting here. You can see how wide I can get this dough. Willie probably do a better job of this than I will. So a couple of holes here, but you can see, I'm going to put this back on the come on in camera here and show how much bigger this is than the peel. It's so much larger than the peel. This is just a sign of a really well-made dough when it can do this. Okay. Look at Willie's perfect there. It's a fresh dough, no holes.
Actually, there was a hole made, and I fixed it.
Great. Now you can see how much bigger that is again than the peel. Put that on a peel there just to show. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Compare that to the size of the original dough. Okay, guys. Great. Thanks.